That's right. And what the states are going to have to decide is whether or not they're going to impose restrictions. And if so, how severe are those restrictions going to be?
To me, I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, this really isn't a class by itself. It's becoming a case of patterns making the predator. And it's one of those cases where one of the things that's going to be very important is where did these things happen and when? That's going to determine whether or not we can file criminal charges. But here's the thing, Brian, justice delayed doesn't have to be justice denied for those victims, because even if there's one case that can be filed, some of the other cases, even if they're well beyond the statute, a judge has the discretion to let the prosecution use those victims as evidence showing intent and pattern, which corroborate the allegations of the case that can be filed. Exactly the issue. But here's the problem for both prosecutors and defense attorneys. Jails and prisons are not filled with nuns and choir boys. They are filled with criminals. But that's why this case is so interesting, because New Jersey has a terrorist charge that they believe fit. It's a balance of safety over sensitivity. And, you know, Brian and I usually are in court with he said, she said. This is he said, they said. That's an environment where Delta's going to really value safety over sensitivity. In other words, they don't tolerate discrimination, but they also don't tolerate disruption.
To Wendy's point, still there could be charges down the road. What's the likelihood of that?
Low. Low to nothing. Low to none. But nonetheless, if it's any solace, no investigation is ever closed if new evidence comes to light. This hearing was OJ's to lose, and the more he spoke, I think his family and his lawyer were afraid that may have been the direction that it was headed.
Exactly.
We know people that sleep with their cell phones, although none of us are going to admit to that.
What happens now, Wendy?
Well, you know exactly right. There's a visceral response that we have to comments like this. Now, viscerally, we know we shouldn't talk like this, but there's a certain segment of society, a large segment of society, that thinks, I want to stay safe, and that's my number one priority
100%
in this day and age. But if you look at the reports, there are dozens of kids that die across the country left in hot cars. The proverbial, does he have a pot to... Right?
Exactly. Right. Very good. Touche.
Right. They're just not going to be economically able to survive. And that's heartbreaking for a lot of the residents. Right, so this lawsuit against Apple has, at its core, pun intended, false advertising. But remember, if he does this, if he wins, he's going to spend the first 100 days in office taking his first 100 depositions and then some, because this type of litigation is incredibly complex.
Here to weigh in is Wendy Patrick, a trial attorney and president of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, San Diego chapter. Wendy, great to see you this morning.
It's a scenario where you've got somebody who is a captive audience, and you hope that's only figuratively. What kind of sexual assault crime did this man intend? Now, all we have is circumstantial evidence. Got the distinctive bullet casings, those 9mm bullet. He used the same gun. They all match, and he had the gun on him when he was apprehended. Here's the law. No body, no problem. But in a case like this, where there were a lot of circumstances that might make it look like an accident, motive matters. And I began my career as a public defender, so I share your experiences there. But I got to tell you, I've also prosecuted prison crimes against inmates. Is the world going to get to watch this unfold in real time?
Wendy, I think you've got a job for the next decade commentating on this trial.
Donald Trump is a man about whom everyone has an opinion. Credibility that's permeating the discussion that we're having. I mean, what did the knife look like? What kind of a knife it was? But did it in this case? If it had, perhaps we wouldn't have had the divergent stories at the beginning. That's the legal argument that's in play during this trial. In other words, do the Benghazi emails come first? Are those going to come out next month?
Those were deleted.
Oh, that's funny.
That's exactly right. I think there's like 300 that are...
And that's the counter argument. Richard says, oh, it's a slippery slope. Because remember that memories, unlike fine wine, do not improve with age. Listen to the standard. More probable than not that he was generally aware of some incidents of wrongdoing. That is so vague. Think of this law not as a complete deprivation, but as a timeout. The things that really breaks your heart about this story, doesn't it? You've got kids killing kids. Now, this is not unprecedented, by the way, to have children as young as 8 being charged with homicide. It's true, it's litigation, but oftentimes litigation leads to legislation. But the Duger clan certainly is not the Brady Bunch, and now we learn they're also not all in the family.
News. Michael Wilds is a former federal prosecutor and professor at the Cardozo School of Law. Wendy Patrick is a prosecuting attorney who has prosecuted dozens of hate crimes. Wendy, what do you make of this investigation so far?
Well, these text messages are very interesting, Sandra. What woman doesn't know where her husband is in the middle of the night? The question is this ignorance in the moment, or does it reflect a greater ignorance of his activities? We know now this man was a triple threat. He was radicalized, armed, and angry. Whether the anger longer stemmed from identity or ideology. This trio of risk factors was something that we would expect that she would have known about.
And that's while he is feeling fatigued. I can imagine what this guy is like when he has a lot of energy.
But under the facts and circumstances, as hard as it is to believe and as strange as it sounds, she won't be facing criminal prosecution. In a CSI world of forensic evidence, it's hard to go missing without a trace. Premeditation can be formed in a very small period of time. Companies have a level of corporate social responsibility. Emotions are high. It's a horrible crime. Everybody's angry. Now, it's true the ballistics support the fact that it ricocheted, but that doesn't necessarily absolve the defendant from liability from a murder charge.